Deuteronomy 20, where God commands Israel to completely destroy entire cities, men, women, children. So maybe help us with context there, right? Because sometimes we might hear like headlines. Like, here's the headline. And you kind of read that, you read the snippet, but is there more that we should understand about this?
You just read Paul Copen's book, right?
So I listened to him talk a little bit about it. And kind of
Is it Paul Copen?
Yeah, Paul Copen.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book. It's called "Is God a Moral Monster?"
That's a great title.
Yeah, like
we should repeat that. Is God a moral monster?
Wow.
And that even just goes to like the wrestle, right? Talk about like you can, what you just said, look at the headlines and be like, I don't know, like maybe, like I just read this. How do I make sense of that?
Yeah.
And so like, again, this is how he understands it, and I'm sure there's a ton of different takes on this, right? But this helped me make sense of that wrestle a ton. And so he talked about a bunch of different things. You talked about context. That was like a big one for him, because he really references, I mean, I think we've already talked about in this podcast how the Bible has different forms of literature in it, right? And so sometimes it's like, it's poetry. Sometimes it's like, well, it's kind of a biography of people who are eyewitnesses to Jesus, and this one's history. And so it's really helpful to know what you're looking at in the Bible. And it's additionally helpful to know, after I know what I'm looking at in the Bible, how do I compare that to what else was written in that genre of that day? And so when we're looking at Deuteronomy, it's like, all right, that's like historical, particularly in this case, like military history. And he noticed this theme where as he looked at some of the phrases in the Bible and as he looked at like other historical contexts, there tends to be, and it's kind of like when you hear about it, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. It's like a bunch of guys. But like, there's almost this like bravado, like hyperbole, like, hey, when we crushed them, we left nobody left. Like, similar to like sort of what we do with sports. Like, dude, the Phillies crushed the
Destroyed
Dodgers.
them.
Like the Eagles, like blew the Chiefs to smithereens, like stuff like that. None of us read those headlines. We're like, we should check up on them in the hospital. Like, we're like, no, like it was hyperbole.
Yeah, he hit that home run a mile long.
Yeah.
It's like,
None of us are like, well. So there's almost this element of that where they would almost just overplay what they had done. Again, not like excusing the fact like this is war and horrific, but not down to like the last man, right? Not complete annihilation or genocide.
Hey, total nerd note on that. Okay, you know when you say someone was decimated or they were decimated, that actually means made, or it was actually destroyed 1/10. Isn't that funny?
Wow.
When you decimate something, you don't destroy it. You're actually only taking 1/10 of it away. Isn't that funny?
That doesn't seem like that much.
I know, it really doesn't.
We talk about that all the time. We're like, man, you was decimated. And in my head, I'm like, 1/10, pretty weak.
That's like twisting my ankle. Like most of these good, but I'm just.
But you're saying like destroyed. You were completely wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah.
Like even so an example outside of the Bible, they have a writing from a Moabite king, and he's talking about how they beat Israel in this battle, and he even says like Israel is no more. Well, like clearly they are.
Yeah.
Like they're like around today. The whole rest of the Bible's about them,
Yeah.
but like that's just how they kind of talked about it. And
So you're saying the Bible basically it records the sayings of the day in a sense, like it's operating within the language of the day, and it's not something that's overarching. Like, okay, well they completely wiped out, but it's like in a hyperbolic way saying we achieved the mission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Kind of a snapshot of
Yeah.
hey, this is how they would talk in that time. He also talks a ton about which sometimes I'm like, I wish I came up with this, right? Just like, hey, just keep reading, essentially, is some of the ways he just talks about, where it's like, all right, so you have this hyperbole, and if that's true, if you just keep reading through the story, you should find instances of where it's like, oh, there's additional commands afterwards that talks about survivors, or like, hey, don't marry with them, and things like that. And we actually see that, and I can read some of them, but like, if you just keep reading, you see that like, there'll be like a verse that talks about, hey, we destroyed everybody. And then just a little bit later, it'll be like, God will be like, well, don't intermarry
those
with
people
them.
that are left behind.
And you're like, wait a minute, which one is it?
I thought there were nobody left behind.
And so I'm just going to read like a couple of them.
And they got to be some real gems that are left behind.
And so this is Joshua, this is Joshua 10:40. It says, so Joshua conquered the whole region, the kings and the people of the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the mountain slopes. He completely destroyed, there you go, everyone in the land, leaving no survivors, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. And then if you go to the next book, so this is Judges, chapter 1, it's literally the first 3 verses. It says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, which tribe should go first to attack the Canaanites? Like, they're still out there. We want to fight them. The Lord answered Judah, for I have given them the land, or victory over the land. And it says that they got ready. The men of Judah, here we go. The men of Judah said to their relatives from the tribe of Simeon, join us in the fight against the Canaanites living in the territory allotted to us. Then we will help you conquer your territory. I think my favorite one, though, it's like the same 5 chunks of verses. This is Deuteronomy chapter 7. And this is the one where I believe he pretty much tells them, hey, like, go kill everybody, and then, hey, don't marry them. And so this one has a bunch of names of the people that I'm going to butcher. So just calling that out right now.
You got to do your best.
Right? I do my best. Here we go. Here we go. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. Here we go. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites.
Hey, great.
I believed you.
Yeah,
I know, yeah, confidence. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you. When the Lord your God hands these nations over to you, and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. There it is, completely destroy. Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. Here we go. Verse 3. You must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods.
Yeah, who's there to marry if they're all gone?
Yeah.
Right.
And so part of what Copeland just says is, you're like, hey, like, just keep reading. There's this theme of like, there's a command or a phrase that mentions that they completely destroyed everything or everybody. And then normally not long afterward, there's a command that's like, hey, be very careful around the survivors. Don't marry them. Tear down their altars. Do all these things.
So some people may say, well, then God's lying. Or, God's not telling the full truth. But I think you got to not rest there. You got to go further and be like, God's speaking the language. He's relating to the people. And the things are being recorded in such a way of how they would have recorded it back then.
Yeah.
And it just sounds weird to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He also, probably like the final piece, I think that really helped me. He talked about the actual wording of utterly destroyed too. Like, this is where I phone a friend. You want to say it? Harem? Harem. You got to get like some phlegm in there. Herem. We read it a lot when we're looking at the translations that we just read of like utterly destroyed. And so like it can mean destroyed, but oftentimes more what it meant was a way of God reclaiming wholly what was his. Like, and so he's like cutting away everything that's not his and reclaiming it. There's even verses where I think it's Jeremiah 25 where he talks about hareming the tribe of Judah, and he doesn't destroy them, but he's like, it's almost an identity thing. It's like, I got to reclaim what's mine. And so we see this a lot here, more of God's not so much waging war on people, but even like ideology. He's talking about like, hey, if Israel is my people, and there are these competing ideologies around, after we conquer those people, we got to make sure that we do away with those things.
And the whole idea of harem is that like it's through fire that it's burned up and now it's claimed by God. Yeah. And so, there are times where they talk about something that seems like, whoa, that's a little too much. Intense. But like what you're saying with like, what tribe was it again? That was
Judah.
Yeah. So obviously he's not burning the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, even like modern day context, it's like when you look back at World War II, right? It's like, hey, so what the Nazis did, like that's ethnic cleansing, like 6 million Jews dead. Like that's why we went to war, stuff like that. Very different than what we did with the Nazi Party and the Germans, right? Again, war is horrific, but like Allies, U.S. forces defeated the Nazis, did a lot of honestly the same things. Where it's like swastikas are gone, ideology's gone, like we're getting rid of all of that stuff.
Wiping it out.
But like the German people are fine otherwise. And so there's a very big difference between those two things. Again, both war, both horrific, but one is saying, hey, the problem is that you're a certain people group. The other one's like, no, the problem's an ideology that almost like cancer has like just worked its way tumorously into the society, and we've got to cut it out.
Yeah, it's like mold. Yeah. And not that people were mold. And most of the people that were innocents left the cities. They escaped into the hills. And so when you took the city, the people that were left behind were mostly combatants. So it's not this image of like there's this plain of 3 million people that are getting wiped out. It's not like a Hollywood type of thing. You're talking about a very small concentration of people. And it seems like all throughout the ancient Near East, they would inflate those numbers and just talk about them like, man, we destroyed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it's not like it's lying. It's weird for our ears. It's a way of saying like, look how much adversity we overcame. It's like, I talked about this before. What's his name? Zacchaeus. Yep. Zacchaeus meets Jesus, gets changed, has him to dinner, and he's like, I'm a changed man. I'm going to pay back everybody 4 times the amount. Everybody reading that from the Middle East goes like, oh, okay, well, we're not lining up for 4 times the amount that we were charged. We understand this is hyperbole. This is him saying, I'm a changed man. And it's just foreign to our ears to hear those inflated numbers.
Yeah. Up there with a calculator, like, how much is it?
All right, then.
And I think that's probably, I'm sure people feel frustrated towards that complexity because it feels like Shouldn't the Bible be somewhat more approachable?
Right.
Like if I why do I got to read through everything? Like maybe that's why if I just take everything literal, it at least makes that simple. Where it's like at least I just know it is what it is. And what I'm hearing you guys say is like it feels like it's introducing a complexity where I'm reading. And we are reading ancient text, right? So maybe that's par for the course. But it feels almost like a juke. Like here's what the Bible says. Oh no, but didn't mean that. Right? Like go destroy them. It's like no, but like now that you're upset about it, that's not really what it meant.
Well, we also got to remember this too. There's another like all these are all facets to that one. Like how do we explain this? So the other facet is that many of these places that the Lord told Israel to go into were pretty bad, and I'm not, you should not have the image of like, they just went into this valley where people were churning butter and, and not that they were like super evil drug dealers and, like serial rapists or anything like that. But they did, their forms of worship were horrible. Like the Ammonites worshipped Molech. It was the Moabites that worshipped Chemosh. And both of these gods, in some form, had infant sacrifice. Oh, wow. And like this, that's heinous. You take a figurine of a god that has arms like this, and you heat up the arm area to where it glows red, and you place the baby inside of it. Or then you put them in an urn and then burn it. So they've discovered these valleys of like infant bones inside these little like ossuaries. That kind of stuff was what God mentions. He's like, I've seen the sins of these people. And it almost, there's certain verbiage that indicates that God was trying to reach them, or God was trying to like either send like Jonah, send people to say, hey, turn back from this, repent. And they don't. And so I think there's a point, you might even have it on your paper over there, but it's like 400 years I've put up with this, and now it's reached its max, and I'm ready to pull the trigger on this. I mean, these were civilizations that had idolatry. And, dude, the idolatry was weird, okay? And it's weird to us, but there was ritual prostitution. So you'd have men and women that would, like, kind of hang out in these temples. And so it's Ashtaroth and Baal. There's like Ishtar, Astarte, or kind of like different forms of them. All throughout the ancient Near East, you had these connections where in a temple, you would have a prostitute, either male or female, which would represent the divinity. And so Astarte or Ashtaroth would be like the female, and she would take on almost like a possession of that deity. And you could go in, pay your dues, you'd pay for this experience, and have a sexual experience with this prostitute. And so there were different ways that it was structured. There would be a priest, and this is so weird, but there would be a priest who would instruct you on what to do during this whole thing. And the idea was that you were going to bring about fertility, you're going to bring about great crops, you're going to help rainfall. This was how you made contact with the divine. And so not only was it a kind of a weird sexual thing, because these women, not many men, there were some men that did this, but it was majority women. And when the women did it, they were looked up to. They were kind of seen as like, oh, wow, they have a special status in your mind only. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like lip service was paid, like, oh, thank you for your service. But they were often mistreated. They were not given a whole lot of rights, as you can expect. You know what I mean? Like the prostitutes in a sense. And even though it was a ritual form of it, by lip service, it was like, thanks for doing what you do. But it was a miserable life. And you felt used. And what happens when you have lost your beauty? So are people going to want to pay to go with someone who's 60 years old, 70 years old? No, that's not going to happen. So you were worn out and you were cast aside. So you had this kind of society that in many ways, almost like what we do with our youth and beauty in our culture, we cast aside these people. And it's almost like God saying, like, look, I don't want you to do that. They mistreated the poor. They mistreated orphans, widows, slaves. There was torture of people that were held from military campaigns. So like all of these societies were brutal, and they didn't have God's law. And that's why, like, when you read through Leviticus, when you read through Deuteronomy, when you read through the law that's given in Exodus, there are so many limitations that God brings on the Israelites in certain areas. It just seemed weird to us. Like, why would God make that law? Because the surrounding cultures were doing these things that were just horrible to each other. And so that's why the Jews loved the law, because the law gave them freedom. It also gave them, like, okay, if somebody hurts me, I have a law that I can refer to get justice. But it also prescribed a way that was different than the nations, and that we didn't do something like that. Does that make sense? I mean, God was definitely seeing, he was keeping score, and he's like, okay, we're going to have to get rid of this way of life. That we can't do this anymore.
I've got your verse, Genesis 15:16. Yeah, after 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction.
Yep.
It's almost like this threshold God has before he intervenes.
So some of what we've covered so far is like got like legit judgment on people who have been doing very evil things, sometimes for a long time, and God's kind of like ready to enact that judgment on them. Some of it is hyperbole, war talk, where it probably wasn't literally everyone, but they're just using terms to say, like, destroy them, basically, like take away their will, take away like
it doesn't explain all of it, but it helps to like, okay, I get a better perspective on it.
But so I mean, I think we're covering certain pockets of this so far, right? And we're getting some of that war stuff, some of those like big, that I could see the path to that on some of those big war ones. And so we still have some others that start to get a little.
But wait, so on the last thing before we go into the next thing here is God's anger at sin is like like a parent's anger would be at his kid's cancer. So he doesn't hate the kid, he hates the cancer. And so it's just that anger. There was a quote out there that was like, God can't be good if he's not angry at sin. And that is really what fuels a lot of this. And think about this. So God is talking about the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, all these different people that are doing these things that are wicked, that are like horrible, that we would all be like, whoa, you shouldn't do that. And it's mitigated by the fact that, in Israel, the law is saying we're not going to live like that, And then, think about this, when the Israelites don't even live up to the law anymore and they start taking on some of the characteristics or some of the worship styles, the idolatry of Baal and Ashtoreth and the rest of it, then God uses Babylon to chastise them. So think about that for a minute. It's like reversed. Is it possible, when you think through like the Assyrians and the Babylonians that came in and took over Israel, it's because Israel sinned. So it's not so much that God is inspiring genocide. There was a time in which even the Assyrians and Babylonians came in and destroyed Jerusalem, and destroyed the Jews because they were sinning. And so God is angry at sin. God's anger at sin is not the opposite of love. It's an expression of love. It's like, look, I've created this thing. I've made all of this for you. It's beautiful. It's perfect. It's like everything I've done is a work of art. And somebody has come by with spray paint and spray painted over everything. Sin has come by and hacked it to pieces. So I'm angry at that person. And I want to go through and I want to stop that person from doing that thing. And so sometimes when whole nations embrace evil and when they do things that are not of God, God's got to show his anger at that sin.